Hi, everybody. I hope you can hear me. Welcome to the SpinSheet Happy Hour. We're having some technical difficulties here. Sailing is fun. Live programs are fun too. Welcome back. Zach Dittmars is running our program tonight because Chris Charbonneau, I don't know, he's out at a party or something. So, and Zach, I think, is having some technical difficulty. So I'm not sure if you can hear me or see me, but I'm just going to keep talking. And there he is, Zach. You're muted.
So they usually call me the tech whiz, and I'm just not striving. But although I live on a peninsula down at Thomas Point here in Annapolis, Maryland, and we have some crazy winds, and I think my internet blipped out just as the show began, and I couldn't hear Molly. Anyway, thanks for everyone for tuning in.
And, hey, that's okay. These people are sailors. They're used to things going sideways, and sometimes immediately. So anyway, for anyone who doesn't know Zach is our production manager. So that means when you're reading the magazine, you say SpinSheet looks great. It's because Zach and Royal make the magazine look great. So he also makes the websites look great and our boat show booths and everything. So thank you, Zach, for taking over SpinSheet Happy Hour tonight.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, let's start by thanking Mount Gay Rum, because we can't do these programs without the sponsorship of Mount Gay, and we love Mount Gay Rum. We hope everybody out there who drinks alcohol and rum in particular will drink Mount Gay Rum. So just so happens I'm personally not having a Mount Gay Rum drink tonight. I'm feeling a little headachy, so I'm just drinking a little mocktail over here. How about you, Zach? What are you drinking?
It's brown. It's in a glass. Let's call it Mount Gay Rum.
Okay.
That's what it is.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers, and welcome to a good recovery. We do this thing where we try to do it at the end of the program, this Mount Gay red hat photo of the month. And those who are regulars to the program, and I see a couple of the regulars there, we sometimes forget. So we're just going to start with it this time. So this is last month's Mount Gay rum photo of the month. I just like the guy's game face. It's very concentrated, and this is during a frostbite race in Annapolis. And then at the same race, there was Eric Richardson on our team who sails Blinding Fury. There was if you see the SpinSheet sticker on his sail, and you also see a U-Spirit sticker, and one of his crew members there, Jay, is wearing a more classic style Mount Gay red hat of the month, which has kind of turned pink like a lot of ours. So thanks, Eric, for keeping your crew in theme, and so those are our red hat photos of the month. And we have a great show planned for you tonight. We have Mark Thornton from Lake Erie Weather. I think we say Lake Erie WX or Lake Erie Weather. I never quite know how you say that. I know how to spell it. Anyway, he's going to be on the program. And Zach is you going to go hide out in the green room and take care of the stuff from the background?
Yep, I'll be there when you need me.
All right, great. Well, if things go sideways again, just shoot me a text. I have my phone in front of me here, and I'll keep my eye on the chat and on the comments. And let's go ahead and bring on Mark, who's from his very fancy St. Augustine office today.
Hey, Molly.
Hey, Mark, welcome back to the SpinSheet Happy Hour. It's nice to see you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I went and looked up our conversation from last year, and it was almost exactly a year ago
wow.
that you came on the Happy Hour program. I know time flies when you're having fun.
That's
right.
I
remember we got a lot of great weather questions from people. And Mark came to us, a little over a year ago. We got a call from someone from Cruisers University who said, hey, do you guys know Mark Thornton? It might be a good match for him to do some sort of a weather seminar for you. And then Mark, I remember you and I had a conversation, and I was working in home office at the time, because I remember sitting on my couch talking to you, and you were on a camping trip. And it looks like you're on another camping trip.
I'm still on a camping trip. Yeah, from the mobile studio here.
And where's your camping trip this time?
We are in Anastasia State Park, which is just a little bit south of St. Augustine, right on the ocean. If you've never been there, it is an awesome place to visit.
Yeah, well, it sounds awesome because it's cold here in Maryland and Virginia today. So So, Mark, you know the drill because you've been on the program before, and anyone who's already read the February issue of SpinSheet, and I know a few of you are dedicated readers, they will know the answer to this question, but we always like to start at the beginning. So if you wouldn't mind just giving us a little background on how you came into boating and sailing and what kind of boating and sailing you do now, then we'll start talking about weather.
Sure. Yeah, so I moved to Cleveland in the mid 80s for a job and met my wife. And just on a lark, we went to the Cleveland Boat Show. You know, we were kind of paddlers. We didn't have a sailboat or anything, and stumbled into the Flying Junior fleet. And they were a very engaging crowd and said, you know, they were doing fleet building and said, you know, if you buy a boat and come out to the lake, we'll teach you how to sail. I'm like, hey, that sounds like fun. So we bought a Flying Junior and sailed that and for a few years, and then just kind of kept working our way up and finally ended up with CNC 35 that we sail on Lake Erie.
Now, when you and I were on the phone, you told me how you came upon that CNC 35 because you had a more like a 20-footer, 29-footer before then, right?
Yeah, we had a CNC 29. And yeah, we were at the boat show in Annapolis, kind of a, you know, it was an annual pilgrimage. And I was just wandering around Eastport, and the 35 was for sale right there by the chart house. I don't remember the name of the marina. And we looked at it and it was reasonably priced. So like, well, hey, let's connect with the broker and take a look at it. And like, you know, once you do that, it was a heck of a slippery slope. And the next thing you know, we're buying a boat and shipping it to Cleveland.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's
that
great.
was, yeah, 16 years ago now.
No, and even though these are mostly sailors, I assume these are mostly sailors who are tuning in, or the ones that I can see here in the chat. They're definitely all sailors. You can tell them you've gone to the dark side and tell us about your new purchase.
We have, yeah. Interesting day, too, that we'd be doing this on today. We, in the fall, we purchased a Mainship 34 Pilot. Decided we wanted to kind of shift to a sort of a different type of boating. And so we put the 35 up for sale. And today we signed the title over to the owner. So she's going to stay on the Great Lakes. She's going to move up to Buffalo. So she's still going to be on Lake Erie. So sort of a sad day, really.
Yeah.
Kind of, you know, shifting from one type of boating to the other. But we're looking forward to the change.
Yeah, well, good. Hey, if it's on the water, it's okay by us. We're
right.
We're multi-nautical around here.
I like that.
So when you and I were on the phone, I asked you, can you tell me about a time when you had to give a forecast for a big regatta that was really disheartening, and or there was like one of the like wow kind of a forecast, and you mentioned that the Chicago Mac was pretty much the most memorable one you had. So I'm going to bring on Dave Flynn, because I actually knew that by reading Dave Flynn's article, and he does a Racer's Edge column in SpinSheet sometimes, and he had said in his first paragraph, our weatherman Mark Thornton laid out a report that was really rough. So I figured if Dave had the time to be on the show, and he said he did, so we had this cameo appearance from David Flynn of Quantum Sales, and we can bring David on the screen. We're gonna hear about your forecast from Dave's perspective. You can tell us what you came up with and what Dave heard. Maybe you can start, Mark, by saying what you saw on the screen.
So it's not, it's not uncommon for there to be thunderstorms during both the Chicago Mac and the Bayview Mac. It's July, it's in the Great Lakes, so like no one should be surprised. So thunderstorms are typically mentioned. But this summer for the Chicago Mac, it was sort of a completely different scenario. Discussion of thunderstorms started on Thursday. The race starts on Saturday. And so 4 days ahead of time for there to be, a fair amount of certainty on thunderstorms is sort of unusual. And you sort of expect, well, it's going to change significantly by the weekend. And on Wednesday, it sort of got dialed in a little closer or, a little sharper. And then on Friday, getting dialed in a little more. And it's like, it's not so much if it's going to happen, it's just, the minute details that were going to be different. And this was going to be a significant event, multi staged 3 or 4 rounds of fairly significant thunderstorms. Storm motion at 40, 50 knots, winds to 70 knots, 2-inch hail, chance of tornado. And it was almost as if it was lined up perfectly to sweep across Lake Michigan just at the time that the racing fleet was going to be in that area. And so, I'm doing private forecasts for folks, and it scared the crap out of me. Like, I'm not going to be on a boat. And it's like, this is one scary forecast. And so, I really wanted to, scream out as loud as I could, don't go. It's like, this is going to be dangerous. Bad things are going to happen. But you can't do that. You have to stay, dispassionate and let the teams make their own decision, provide the data and answer questions and let the teams make their decisions. But by far, this was the most, the scariest forecast and briefing that I've done in the, 12 years I've been doing weather routing.
Yeah. So David, welcome back, by the way.
Thank you for having me, Molly. It's a pleasure to be with you guys.
Oh, it's always great to have you on. You're like an old pro. You've been a many-time guest on the show. So Dave, your team had hired Mark to be your forecaster, right? Can you explain sort of how that relationship worked and what you were hearing from Mark and ultimately how you guys made your decisions?
Yeah, so I was sailing on a Carkeek 40 Meridian owned by Chesapeake Bay local sled shell horse from Hampton, Norfolk area, Virginia. And we'd done a couple of Mackinacs together before. I have done, I don't know, I can't even count, 20, 25 Mackinac races over the decades I've been sailing. It's always one of my favorite races. It's fresh water. It's really nice sailing. It's usually a downwind, pleasant race. And so we had hired Mark because, in today's world of distance racing, I mean, things have come so far with the abilities of forecasters to give you some really good information, and also the tools you have to use that stuff. The integration into programs which can predict how you're routing and how fast you're going to go and when you're going to get there. And so having accurate weather information is the whole key to making that modeling work. And so it's worth every dime, I can tell you, of investing in a good source of weather data, and all the top teams do that. And Mark is, especially in the Great Lakes, is known as one of the real authorities there. And so we had hired him. We started the team on our team. Mark Wheeler is our navigator, and Mark is a ex-Navy fighter pilot and Delta Airlines pilot for a million years. Very detail oriented, really good navigator. And of course, 10 days before the event, we're doing our first runs, and everybody's like getting these things like, wow, how many hours is it going to take us to get to Mackinac? And of course, I'm sitting there in the back going, are you kidding me? The weather, you can't tell the weather 10 days from now. I mean, 2 or 3 days out is hard. But on this particular occasion, each weather forecast we kept getting from Mark was, as he said, it was getting more and more honed in. Like, this is not looking good. This is going to happen, And so you had to start paying attention, And 2 or 3 days out, well, those forecasts are getting pretty darn good. But the scary one was on Saturday morning, our last briefing. Mark actually sent us a video, which I went back and watched this afternoon. I asked Mark where it was, and he dug it out, and he showed me this thing. And it is definitely the most frightening weather briefing that I have ever gotten. And I've done hundreds of them at this point. It was clear that something bad was going to happen. And if you were going to leave the dock, there was you had to be ready for that. And as Mark said, you'd love to cry out and say, hey, don't go. Because like when I teach safety at sea seminars, which I do the heavy air section on, the very first thing I start with is know when to say no and don't go.
Yeah, and that old expression, when in doubt, don't go out.
Yeah. Well, and just 6 weeks prior to the Mackinac race, the same boat and same team was about to go do the Annapolis to Hampton race, the down the bay race, as they call it. And we had a scary forecast with some severe thunderstorms and like that, and we didn't go. We said, let's not break the boat before we go to the Mackinac race, and let's not risk, hurting somebody. And as Mark and I were chatting earlier a little bit, there's not hundreds of $1,000s of prize money here. We're doing this for fun, basically. But so that's how we got involved with Mark is bringing on board the technical side that would just help us race better. You know, with that kind of accurate information, we could choose a much better way to go. And at this point on Saturday morning, when we're looking at this forecast, probably the best way to go would have remained tied up at the dock, but we didn't.
Yeah. So before I ask you, David, how that went for you, Mark, did you want to show those slides that you sent to us about the formation of the storm, or did you want to do that after?
No, we can do that now. If Zach wants to bring up just the first slide there.
Show them what you showed us.
Yeah, well, we should have just played the video. So the place to start, whether you're talking thunderstorms or even just a casual afternoon sail, the best place to start is always with the large scale forecast. And so that's what this is. It's the forecast that shows where the highs and lows and the frontal boundaries are, like all the dynamics that cause the things that we're concerned about, high winds, thunderstorms, and so forth. So this was the forecast for Saturday afternoon of the Chicago MAC. And so that dark red blob that was over sort of the west of Wisconsin there was the area of severe thunderstorms, and where that would be at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Saturday. And that whole red blob was going to be moving east across Lake Michigan much later in the evening, between 8 and midnight. So always start with the large scale forecast. And then Zach, if you'd like to bring up the next slide. And so then what I look at next is the convective outlook. And this is from the Storm Prediction Center. And it shows the area where severe thunderstorms are expected. And you can see the little broad area there with the NH and kind of the dark orange. And this was an area that was the bullseye of where these, very strong thunderstorms are going to be occurring. And this forecast was issued very early in the morning on Saturday before the racers left the dock. And I pulled some of the text from the written portion of the briefing there. You can see it on the screen. Wind gusts to 70 knots, tornadoes, 2-inch hail, and very fast storm motion. Thunderstorm squall line moving at 40 or 50 knots. This was really looking like it was going to be a very high-end event. I guess maybe we'll hold slide 3 and 4 until a few minutes from now.
So, David.
Yes, we were fools.
I mean, that's pretty much what you said in the first paragraph of your article. Really smart sailors would have chosen not to go. But we went,
Yeah, that big red blob, we knew we were going to definitely just about aiming right for it. Because when the race started, it was a downwind race and pretty darn pleasant conditions, sunny, nice, and with basically a VMG run where you could choose your jibe. Most of the routing had us going kind of really straight up the lake, up the run line, effectively. Early in the race, though, we noticed a pretty strong advantage to the boats that were sailing closer to the Michigan becoming Wisconsin shoreline, the western shoreline of the lake. And so we spent most of our time in that neck of the woods. And also, they're kind of a pack of the faster boats, the TV-52s and things like that, started to sort of break away from the boats that were sailing more traditional, straight down the run line kind of thing. And you could see the distances, growing between the two of them. The other thing in our mind was we had certainly talked about what we were going to do when we got to this weather. And our thinking was that we would rather be to windward and nowhere near the Michigan shore, which would be what it was going to be a lee shore at that point. And we want to be able to have some room if things really hit. One of the tactics in these things is simply just to bear off and run away from it, or try to sail downwind. You can do that. Maybe you have to take your main down. Who knows? But surviving 70 knots of breeze, you need some room to roll. And so we chose to go west with the whole program, and it developed eerily on track. Most weather forecasts, as good as they have gotten, there's a hard problem with timing. I think Mark will tell you more about that than I can, but based on my experience looking at a lot of weather modeling, it's really, you can get the big picture, but it's hard to know when it's going to happen exactly. This was one of those cases where the timing was pretty remarkable. So the first line of squalls, and Mark, I'm sure we'll talk about this, there was actually two sort of sections of weather that were coming at us, was supposed to arrive, really just before sunset. And that's about when it did. We were getting very close to Milwaukee at that point. And the thing, there's a big difference when you can see on the water what's going on and when it's pitch black and you can't see anything and you have no idea what's coming. So this first set of squall lines was, you could see it. And we were close enough to the shoreline. We had on our cell phones, we had, radar where you could see the blobs and you could see the Milwaukee airport weather forecast and see it was blowing 36 knots or whatever in Milwaukee. So you knew about what was coming. It was looking like a 35 to 40 knot squall. And yeah, it was going to be windy and nasty, but you can deal with that. And so when that hit us, we were pretty ready for it. I could see it. And so we just bore off, 40, 50, whatever we could sail, in 40 knots of breeze with just a main and a jib. And because we took the spinnaker down plenty early and kind of held on for the 20 minutes of the intense 40 knot stuff until we got it down into the, the 30 knot range where you could kind of head up and start heading north again and going towards the islands. But that was right on time. It lasted for a half hour, 45 minutes, which is typical for most of these, Mark knows better, but my experience is that, you get these squalls anywhere, but particularly on the Great Lakes, and there's this big, huge blast of breeze. And then once that tapers down, a lot of times it just goes away and that's it. Matter of fact, it can go calm in many cases. In this particular case, it didn't go calm. It toned down, and it got dark. And now we're further offshore and lacking tools like radar and things like that, because, we're still on a small carbon racing boat. Around about midnight, which is just when Mark and his team had predicted the really big stuff was going to come in, it did. And this time it was white out rain and there was some hail and it was as gnarly as it gets. But we had talked again about what to do in this situation. And on a boat like ours, the only tactic is you just take the mainsail down and bury it under as many bodies as you can, and then hang on with just the jib. And we actually did that pretty successfully. But what was weird about this particular evening and this night that it's different from the typical is these squalls just kept coming. And all night it was pretty breezy and rainy, and there was never any let up to the whole thing. And we eventually had to drop out because we literally ripped the mast track off our mast trying to put our mainsail back up. We have a halyard lock system, so we were trying to get that main back on the lock, which was hard in 25 or 30 knots of breeze. And eventually just our whole track just ripped right off the mast, and that was the end of our race. But even still, we had to sail to safety was the Michigan shore, which is, was 5 hours away or whatever. So we were out there all night, and I can tell you the weather was just wild. I mean, there was squalls in succession, with puffs up into the 30s, and then it would die down to the 20s. And there was the most amazing lightning show that any of us had ever seen. I mean, it was just, the gods were very, very angry and letting you know about it. So if you weren't scared already, with pitch black and all this breeze and, wildly changing directions, then there was this giant lightning coming down at you, and Thor was trying to strike you dead. So it was an incredibly wild night that unfortunately was entirely predicted on the front end. Usually you go into these things where it's like, well, we'll just go out there and, they could be wrong. It could not be that big a deal. And there is a percentage chance that that's correct. But this percentage chance was pretty small.
I tell you, you and Sled and Mark and the Meridian team are pretty hardcore. You've been through some stuff.
Well, that was one of the reasons we wanted to do it. that was one of the reasons we went and did it, because in one of our previous endeavors, we had lost Mark Wheeler overboard. Managed to get him back finally. But that was, probably the scariest hour of my life. And so once again, we'd only gotten as far as Muskegon. So the running joke of our team is that, we've done the Chicago to Muskegon race twice. We're going to do this Mackinac race. We're going to get this thing just this once. But yeah, that was definitely part of the motivating factor of going out there, even though we knew we were going to probably get pounded. And
I was there at the Safety and Sea when you and Mark told the story of him going overboard during this Chicago Mac race, and the fact that he was saved by his $2 whistle attached to his life jacket. And I can tell you that they had to have sold out of whistles very rapidly at all the chandleries in Annapolis. I have one in all of my life jackets, and pretty chilling tale.
And everybody, our boat was this time very, very well equipped in terms of safety devices. Everybody had AIS, and it was life jacket wearing is sort of more of a religious thing now. Once you've been through one of those experiences.
Yeah, well, God bless them for still going out on sailboats and gnarly weather, no less. Yeah, pretty tough stuff. Mark, did you want to show the rest of your slides before we move on to a different topic?
Yeah, Zach, you can put up slide 3. Kind of just going a little backwards in time here, but there was actually a series of pretty severe thunderstorms before the race even started. And so this is just the southern end of Lake Michigan there. And in the hours preceding the start of the race, kind of as if anyone wasn't paying attention to the forecast, this was kind of a wake-up call. Series of water spouts and a 60-knot gust at the Chicago crib prior to the start of the race to reinforce this was not going to be any sort of normal Mac race. You can go to the last slide there. So this is sort of right before the action really started on Saturday night, sort of superimposed there, the squall line that was approaching the southern end of Lake Michigan. And then on the inset there is the data from Yellow Brick, which is the tracker used by the Chicago Mac race. And this is always sort of my concern, is that you've got this cluster of boats, a few hundred boats right in the path of squall line. And, as Dave was kind of going through his story, there's some positives, that everybody in the Chicago Mac are good sailors, they're prepared, they're all very safety oriented, and they know what to do when a thunderstorm strikes. So that's kind of the good part. But the part that always kind of concerns me is that look at how closely those boats are all clustered together. And, when boats are trying to sail downwind in 60 or 70 knots, I always am concerned about collisions, between 50, 60-foot boats going very, very fast, out of control in a tight pocket of boats. And of course, that didn't happen in the Chicago Mac. But
I can tell you there were those calls.
Yeah, and because everyone, they're trying to manage the boat. It's very difficult to see, and very easy for a collision to happen in these sorts of conditions.
Wow. Well, great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing those slides. So, David, before we send you off into the night, are there any lessons learned from this race from your perspective? Anything you would have done differently?
Made sure the mast track stayed on the boat would have been, because again, if we'd gotten the mainsail back up, we had gotten through the worst part of the whole equation. Our tactics had been appropriate. Mm-hmm. And we just had mechanical issues that we have since resolved. One, fixing the mast lock, which itself turned out to be part of the problem. And then the other is we literally replaced the track with one that's, instead of being glued on, actually bolted on. And it has, instead of having, when you go offshore, and I've learned this lesson before, I don't know why, when we race inshore, we race with bolt ropes on mainsails, right? Because you want this thing as light as possible, a nice clean, attachment point to the sail. When you go offshore, you really need to attach it with some kind of cars, because in order to be able to reef or take the mainsail down completely in a storm, the only way you can keep it under control is if it stays attached to the mast. And so now we've set the boat up with an Antal track and cars, so we can more easily reef. And when we do take the sail down, we don't have to have 10 people lying down on it to keep it from, blowing off the boat, which is where we were on the whole thing. So yeah. You need to have the right systems to make these things work. And frankly, we really didn't have the right tool, because hey, the Mackinac race is a nice race in the summer, and it's downwind and light to moderate air, and no, we don't have problems. It's like, well, that's as it turned out, that was not the case whatsoever. So again, if we'd been able to keep the mast track attached to the boat, we would have finished the race fine, and we would actually
have won.
Damn straight, we were way out in front. I mean,
I saw you there ahead of the fleet in that little picture.
we were in that little corner up in the left-hand side against the
totally to windward. Yeah. Well, Dave, we appreciate you telling your side of the story. As always, it's awesome to have you on the SpinSheet Happy Hour, and we hope to have you on the SpinSheet Happy Hour again soon, since you are sort of only semi-retired.
I am semi-retired. And thank you very much for having me, Mark. Very nice to see you face to face.
Cheers, and have a good weekend, Dave.
Yeah. All right. Good night,
Take care, Dave.
So before we ask Mark just some more general forecasting questions, we just want to let you guys know that, backed by popular demand, Mark is going to be teaching a 3-part webinar in March. And you can sign up for it at spinsheet.com/thunderstorm-webinar, or you just go to spinsheet.com and find the post with a thunderstorm cloud in it. And if you register for it, you can get recordings for all the sessions. So if you can't make one of them, you can catch it later. The joy of being live for these things, you can ask questions to Mark live. So anyway, we'll pop this up again at the end of the program. For anyone who's just tuning in, I just thought that we'd mention that this is happening in March, and which is why we have Mark back on the program. So if you guys have any questions as we talk about more general forecasting, feel free to just pop them into the chat. And if we don't get to them immediately, we'll get to them before we say goodnight. And Mark, can you just share a little bit about, just in general, what your forecasting routine is when you're looking at weather?
Yeah, sort of as I mentioned when we put the slides up, is to always start with the big picture. Where the highs and lows are and the frontal boundaries. You can tell an enormous amount, regarding the marine forecast just based on looking at a surface forecast and kind of doing some, knowing what the conceptual models and what the drivers are for high winds, high waves, and severe weather, all just from a surface weather map. Mm-hmm. And then from there, it's kind of, the process is referred to as the forecast funnel. So the funnel is inverted. So the broad end of the funnel is the top. And so you start with the large picture and then work your way down the funnel. And then the last thing you look at is actually the wind and wave forecast, because it's downstream of the large scale features that are, driving the weather pattern. So I'm a big proponent of just following the forecast funnel.
Mm-hmm. And whenever you're teaching a seminar, I know you get a lot of the probably sort of most common questions that you get during these seminars. Can you think of any sort of misconceptions that people have, even experienced? We're all armchair weathermen as sailors. We all have a bunch of apps on our phone. We think we know how to read the sky and whatnot, yet all of us get stuck out in it every once in a while. Probably should have seen it coming. Do you have any sort of common misconceptions that you find in your classes?
Yeah, I think that there's, that the app development is great. It's put a lot of weather information in people's hands. It's very, very easy to, keep track of things on the water. But you have to understand that it's still just the computers forecasting the weather. And the algorithms that are used are imperfect, and the observation network is kind of sparse. So while they do, a pretty good job, and Dave actually mentioned this earlier, the timing can be off. So, thunderstorms may form, but it could be an hour earlier or an hour later. They could be a little displaced from where they thought that they were going to form. But even with the vagaries of the forecast, they're still pretty good forecast, but you have to understand that the apps are not a pinpoint solution of at 4:59, just off the Naval Academy, a thunderstorm is going to form. They're not that accurate. But the weather apps and the pretty pictures and the language that are sometimes used maybe promote a little higher accuracy than what actually exists in the process. So you have to sort of take them with a heavy dose of skepticism.
Oh, a question just rolled in. We might as well just pop it up there. It's from Greg Gutman. Greg, thank you for being such a great guest on the SpinSheet Happy Hour. You always show up, and we appreciate it. And Greg's question is, the one item for offshore forecasts that always seems very inaccurate is sea states. Is this just modeled off of surface wind projections?
Largely, yeah, the biggest component of the wave forecasts are the wind forecast. So if your wind forecasts are off, the winds are the wrong direction, or the wind speed's off, then your sea state forecasts are also going to be off. But then there's also some sort of basic dynamics that can result in sea states being under forecast, frequently in the areas of the Gulf Stream, with the passage or the approach and passage of a cold front. It's sort of a known area where wind speeds and then the resulting wave heights are often quite wrong near the Gulf Stream because of the very dynamic environment that exists there.
Mm-hmm. I meant to ask you at the very beginning of the program, and because people come in and out, I'm going to go ahead and ask you now. Can you tell us what led you to becoming a weather expert? I understand you used to work for a law firm. It's really a change from where you used to be in life. How did that transpire?
Right. Yeah. So I was a legal administrator. So I ran the business side of a mid-sized law firm, and had been sailing for several years. And like most people on the water, was always kind of surprised by the disconnect between the marine forecast and what I was actually experiencing. And just on a lark, bought a weather magazine, and there was an ad there for an online weather program. And so I thought, I'll sign up. It was all done online, and it was asynchronous, so you didn't have to be online at any particular time. So I could fit it in with my full-time job. And so I took that program, loved it. I was waiting my whole life for this program to come along. I just didn't know it. And when that program came to an end, Penn State had decided to sort of extend it to a 2-year program, multiple classes into a 2-year program for people just like me, people who were weather enthusiasts. We've had a lot of sailors through the program over the last 20 years or so that take these classes. They can continue to work full time. And it really did, people say something changed their life, but that program really did change my life. And run a side business now. I retired a few years ago, and spend a lot of time doing weather forecasting for people. And it really is very fulfilling.
Mm-hmm.
Much different than what I did for, an actual living.
Yeah. Well, it's neat because obviously you're an outdoorsy guy. You camp, you do a lot of boating, and so I can see why. And I see that Jane's comment made me smile. She said, "Oh, a few of us in law firms and legal understand why doing things with sailing are so much better."
Yeah, no kidding.
So I wonder, Mark, how now that you mean you're an expert now in what you do. You've been doing it now for several years, and you teach it, and people hire you to do forecasting for things. So, but how has it changed the way that you go around the world? I ask this because I know that with sailors, we're always looking at the flag. Like even if we're not sailing, we're like, "Whoa, well, that was a big gust. That was probably about 15." Like we can't help it in our ordinary lives, but to think about wind, and I'll look out on the bay and think, "Woo, white cappy," and I just can't stop myself looking at it and thinking about it. So I was thinking, with all the knowledge that you have, that has to seep into your everyday life.
Oh, it does. Yeah, I'm sort of obsessed with watching the weather maps. I'm very sort of a technologically oriented forecaster or sailor, and so spend a time looking at radar, looking at the surface observations and the pressure patterns to try to understand why. Like the driving force that keeps me interested is why things are happening. And so sometimes the answer isn't so clear. It takes a lot of digging to find out. It's kind of if my wife were present, we kind of have a standing joke between us, in that particularly in the summertime, if I'm working on the Chicago Mac, you know, my head is on Lake Michigan, and I'm worried about, you know, like, you know, what the weather pattern is going to be, you know, what sort of forecast am I going to produce? And, you know, she'll come downstairs and like, oh, so, you know, like, what's the weather going to be like today? And I'm like, and I just give her this blank stare because, like, I have no idea what the weather's going to be like. And I can tell you what it's going to be like in Chicago on the weekend.
Yeah.
So she's like, you know, it's not always helpful, you know, to have a weather person as a husband, because his, you know, his brain always isn't where his body is.
Did you happen to see the link that I sent to you on email today?
Yeah.
So there was an article in the New York Times today that called something like "It's Raining Hyperbole," and it
Yeah.
talked about this weather language like bomb cyclone and atmospheric river, and how not all meteorologists are thrilled with this language. Did you have a chance to read it? Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I actually saw the article before you had sent it today, and this is actually this is a fairly significant issue, really, out there, in a couple of particular areas where, you know, people, the general public may not understand the difference between like a weather watch and a weather warning. You know, there's like a fundamental difference there. Or one thing that's been in the news with the landfall of Ian is how misunderstood the hurricane cone is. You know, the sort of the casual name of it is called the cone of uncertainty, and how people misunderstand what that forecast means. And so if people are, you know, using these products like weather watches or severe weather warnings or, you know, hurricane forecast cones, and the Weather Service is thinking, well, people are going to take this information and they're going to make life and death decisions about where they seek shelter, or, you know, whether they go out on the water or not, and presuming that their forecasts are understood. And what's coming back from social scientists is a lot of those forecast graphics and the language that are used are not well understood. And then kind of layered on top of that, maybe kind of the weather forecast community that maybe is a little more interested in ratings than they are a forecast, will then add the hyperbole. And then that's just taking sort of an awkward situation or an unfortunate situation and making it a lot worse.
Yeah.
Something like, you know, the bombogenesis and the bomb cyclones, and making it sound like this is something brand new. And the reality is, you know, there are 10 of them a year and they've been happening for thousands of years, you know.
Yeah. Snowpocalypse.
Right. And so it's actually sort of an interesting new area of sort of merging science, of social science and meteorology working together now in the Weather Service, trying to design products that are a little better understood and get the, you know, their mission is to save people's lives, and to come up with products that actually do that better. So it's an interesting, I find this particularly interesting because my college degree was in sociology. So I got this kind of merger of my background in the weather forecasting. And so it's a fascinating area.
Mm-hmm. So tell us what you are going to cover in your thunderstorm seminar in March.
Really, thunderstorms A to Z. So how to use Doppler weather radar, how to read weather maps and look and identify the large scale conditions that cause their formation, how thunderstorms work, you know, how they operate, how they function, how to tell the different types of thunderstorms. And then we'll kind of wrap it up with looking at all the forecast products out there that allow you to sort of understand what might happen over the course of a day, how to interpret all of that data, and then look at a number of sort of case studies, you know, live radar animations that kind of allow folks to test their skills. But really, and it's not just for sailors, fishermen, paddlers, anyone who spends time outdoors or the water could benefit from the series.
Do you want to pop up Jack Regan's comment Zach. Hi, Jack. Another regular. Rate weather.gov. What do you think of weather.gov?
Oh, the National Weather Service site, great site for data. One of the advantages of getting your data from the National Weather Service is that most all of their products have the added knowledge and of experience of the professional forecasters. So if you're reading a marine forecast, there's actually an experienced meteorologist who's looked at all of the data and has actually written that forecast or produced the graphic. And that really stands in stark contrast to getting your wind forecast from an app that no meteorologist has looked at the data. It's just the computer processes the data and produces a fancy graphic. So stuff from the Weather Service has an added value of the experience of the forecasters. A great resource for marine weather data.
I'm going to ask one last question, and then we do need to move on and show a little Mount Gay video. But talk to me a little bit about weather apps. I know the answer to this question because I've asked this question of you before, but maybe some of the people out there haven't. What do you think about weather apps? Do you have a favorite weather app? We sailors all have different opinions about our weather apps, and
for radar, hands down, Radar Scope. Both for iOS and Android, pretty reasonably priced. Just a great app, great interface. You can really, if you want to really go to the deep end of the pool, looking at radar data and radar products and features, you can get it all from Radar Scope, and it's not hard to learn. For for general forecasting, I really sort of rely on Expedition most time because it's both an analysis and routing program. Often use Squid sailing software. It's a free software that ingests grid data, so it's a gridded forecasting product. You can also do routing with that. And then use a lot of the products from the National Weather Service to kind of fill in the blanks. One of the things that you can't really get from a weather app are the large-scale weather maps that show the surface features of the highs and lows, the stuff that we looked at earlier in this evening. You really need to go to the internet and go to a website that has that kind of data. It's very difficult to get the sort of data where a meteorologist has had a hand in drawing a map through an app.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Well, guys, we're at last call. I think we'll bring Zach back on. We have like to thank you guys for showing up for SpinSheet Happy Hour. Mark, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. For anyone
Thanks,
who's
Molly.
in our in the weather seminar, there is an early bird special that lasts until February 15th. Is that right, Mark?
Right. Yeah, February 15th.
Yeah, early bird pricing until February 15th. Other than that, you are welcome to register up until, the last day, right? March 14th or March 15th. We welcome you to the program. I was in the last one and I learned so much. I'm going to sit in again because some of it went over my head and I didn't go back and listen to them as I should have, but it was a really excellent program and we were privileged to have Mark deliver it for us and to come back and agree to do it again. So we really appreciate it, Mark. We tried a little weather seminar last summer that was just one session and it just didn't cover nearly as much as the 3 sessions. So we thought we're going to bring back the real thing. And it's right before sailing season. So thank you, Mark. And Zach, are you going to come back up on the screen and say goodnight to everybody?
Yes. Thanks for joining us. Very informative. I learned a thing or two. Thank you so much, Mark, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
And Zach, thank you for taking over for Sharvin, for giving us part of your Friday night.
Absolutely.
And we'll just sign off here and say cheers, everybody. Have a great and safe weekend. And we have a little drink video from Mount Gay, and we'll just say bye on that note and have a great weekend. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
See you, Mark.
Hey, what's up everyone? Thanks for having me. My name is Dominic Alling. I'm the National Brand Ambassador for Mount Gay Rum. Today I'm going to make you a Black Barrel Daiquiri with our Mount Gay Black Barrel. This is a 3 to 7 year old rum that sees an additional 6 months of aging in heavily charred bourbon barrels. This daiquiri is super easy to make, and all the ingredients you should have readily available at your house, including a bottle of Mount Gay Black Barrel, like I said. I've also went ahead and squeezed some fresh lime juice, so we'll add an ounce of that. Building this all in my shaker, which I will then shake and add ice and shake and put into my cocktail glass. And to finish it off, I'm adding a little bit of simple syrup. So this is a ½ ounce of simple syrup. It's essentially just sugar and water. I do a 1-to-1 ratio, sugar to water. Bring that up to a boil, let it cool off, then add it to my drink. Like I said already, we're gonna add some ice to this cocktail. So I don't recommend using your hands unless you're making it for yourself. You know, we'll try to be sanitary. But since I'm the one that's going to be drinking this drink, I'm using my hands. And then we're just going to shake this. So I have a 2-piece shaker. Works for me, gets the trick done. I've added ice. I have all my ingredients. I'm going to give this a good shake. Okay. And then I'll just strain that out into my glass. You do have the option here to add fruit if you'd like. First start off by learning the classics though before you get ahead of yourself. And there you have it, your Mount Gay Rum Black Barrel Daiquiri. Enjoy.